Underneath every failed connection, behind every late-night overthinking session, there's a silent frustration that eats away at the man who's just trying to love her right. He tries harder, listens longer, becomes softer, more available, more predictable, and still, it's never enough. Not because he's not giving, not because he's not attentive, but because he keeps believing that if he just unlocks the right words, if he just decodes her mood today, she'll finally let him rest in peace beside her. But she never does, and she won't, because the moment he starts trying to get it right, he's already playing the wrong game. Most men are conditioned to believe that love is about anticipating needs, that if you truly care, you should know, that you should sense her silences, read her frowns like scripture, understand the poetry of her withdrawal. But here's the truth no one wants to admit. That kind of empathy isn't love. It's emotional slavery. You're not her partner, you're her psychic. And no one survives in love by trying to be a mind reader. That's a prison where the bars are made of self-doubt and the walls echo with accusations you'll never see coming. You'll hear it in her voice, soft but cold. You'll see it in her eyes, present but distant. You'll feel it in your gut, the tightness, the confusion, the quiet panic. She hasn't said anything's wrong, but she hasn't said anything at all. And now you're pacing around your own mind, trying to retrace every word you said, every text you sent, every moment you might have failed without knowing. You think this means you care. What it really means is that you've stepped into a storm you're not allowed to name. And here's the game. She'll never tell you what she wants directly, because then you could provide it, and it would lose its value. If she says she wants more attention, and you give it, now you're predictable. If she says she needs space, and you offer it, now you're distant. The point isn't clarity, it's leverage. You're meant to feel off balance. You're meant to feel like you're always almost right, always just missing the mark. That anxiety you feel, that's the currency. That's how she knows she's still in control. Let's stop pretending it's miscommunication. It's design. You're not in a relationship. You're in a puzzle where the pieces keep changing shape. And the more you care, the more paralyzed you become. Because you're not fighting for love anymore. You're fighting not to lose something that already made you feel like you're never enough. And the tragedy is, most men confuse that fear with devotion. They think love is supposed to hurt like this. That being on edge means you're still emotionally invested. That pain is the price of connection. But what if it's not? What if the price you're paying isn't for love, but for not knowing how to demand emotional honesty? You see, this idea that you should be able to guess her emotional needs is rooted in a kind of masculine shame, a belief that if you don't understand her without words, you're somehow less of a man. That intuition should replace communication. But that's not masculinity, that's submission. That's you turning your own emotional stability into a sacrifice at the altar of a woman's inconsistency. Because it's not just that she doesn't tell you what she wants, it's that she expects you to know and punishes you when you don't. That's not love. That's silent warfare. That's a game of emotional landmines where you're always the one who ends up apologizing just for stepping into her mood without the right armor. And the scariest part? You've probably normalized. You've probably told yourself this is just how women are. That understanding her is supposed to feel like drowning in questions with no answer. But deep down, a part of you knows better. You feel it in the exhaustion, in the way your confidence has shrunk, in how your voice gets quieter around her, how your presence feels conditional, how your joy has started to depend entirely on whether she smiles at you today. This isn't love. This is erosion. She will never say it out loud, but she knows exactly what she's doing. Maybe not in a calculated villainous way, but in a way that's deeply rooted in power. Power through ambiguity, power through withdrawal, power through emotional scarcity. Because the less she gives, the more you chase. And the more you chase, the less she needs to give. It's a loop, a cycle. And unless you break it, You'll bleed for a version of her that doesn't even exist. But here's the twist. It only works if you're afraid. It only works if you believe that losing her is worse than losing yourself. So what happens when you stop playing? What happens when you start responding to confusion with silence, not explanation? When you stop trying to read between the lines and start requiring clarity or distance? When you decide that your emotional peace is more important than proving you're good enough for someone who won't even speak their truth? That's when everything shifts. That's when she starts to notice that the grip she had on you isn't working anymore, that the weapon of her silence no longer pierces, that the shame she used to induce now bounces off your boundaries like arrows against armor, because you've remembered something she hoped you'd forget, that you have power too. Power not in dominating, but in detaching. Power in knowing that love without communication is just manipulation in disguise. Power in choosing discomfort over dependence. And most of all, power in walking away from any connection that requires you to lose your dignity just to maintain it. And once you taste that kind of power, you'll never beg for emotional breadcrumbs again. You won't chase ghosts, won't decode silence, won't audition for affection. You'll simply hold yourself like a man who knows that love should never feel like a maze designed to make you feel lost in your own skin. And in that moment, ironically, you become the only kind of man who could actually be loved for real. When a man starts walking on eggshells, it doesn't happen all at once. It creeps in, quietly, insidiously, until one day he realizes he's filtering every word, second-guessing every sentence, and overthinking every reaction she might have. That's when you know you're not just trying to make a relationship work. You're trying not to trigger a collapse. And the reason this matters so much is because once you allow emotional silence to become emotional control, you're no longer a man building a bond. You're a man stuck, proving your worth inside a maze she designed. Let's call it what it is: fear of abandonment. Not the loud, dramatic kind. The quiet, soul-deep panic that you'll mess something up without knowing how, and she'll leave without saying why. This fear doesn't scream. It whispers. It tells you to stay agreeable, to apologize even when you're confused, to accommodate before she even asks. And eventually, it becomes a reflex. You stop being real to stay relevant. But here's the twist. She feels that fear. Women are emotionally intelligent in a way most men still underestimate. They sense shifts in posture, energy, even breath. They pick up on tone changes the way animals sense weather. And when they realize that your self-worth depends on their validation, they don't always offer comfort. Sometimes they weaponize it. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's unconscious. But either way, it happens. She learns that all she has to do is get quiet, look distant, withdraw affection, and you'll come running with explanations, gifts, reassurances, promises to do better. She realizes that she doesn't need to confront you directly. She can just shift her energy, and you'll panic. This is how power is traded in emotionally unbalanced relationships. Not through shouting matches or ultimatums, but through the invisible economy of attention, distance, and doubt. She withholds warmth, and you pay for it with your peace. And the more you chase her emotional weather, the less stable you become inside your own skin. Let me give you a real-world example. A man I coached, we'll call him Nathan, was dating a woman who never criticized him directly. But whenever he talked about a goal, she'd just go silent. Whenever he expressed happiness that didn't involve her, she'd withdraw sexually. He couldn't explain it, but he always felt like he was walking out of step. And what did he do? He adjusted, pulled back his ambition, stopped sharing good news. Over time, he shrank just to avoid triggering her cold front. And the craziest part? He thought he was being a better man. This is where men get trapped. They confuse self-erasure with emotional maturity. They think peace means silence, that love means compliance. But real connection never requires you to lower your volume just to avoid being too much. The moment you start minimizing yourself to protect someone else's comfort, you're not in love. You're in submission. And let's get even deeper here. Why does this pattern repeat so often? Because most men were never taught to hold space for their own emotional boundaries. They were taught to pursue, to fix, to win her back at any cost. And somewhere along the way, they internalized the belief that if she pulls away, it means you failed. That if she's cold, you must warm her. If she's distant, you must draw closer. But this creates a dynamic where your identity becomes reactive, defined only by how she feels. And here's the uncomfortable truth. If your greatest fear is losing her, she doesn't even have to leave. She just has to make you feel like she might. That's how the manipulation begins. You'll get texts with no warmth, delayed replies that keep you guessing, eye rolls instead of engagement. She's not yelling, but she's shifting the emotional temperature until you sweat. And if you stay in that space long enough, it will start to feel normal. That's when you lose yourself. So how do you stop the cycle? You start by removing the reward. Every time you respond to emotional punishment with increased effort, you train her nervous system to expect control through withdrawal. You're reinforcing her behavior, just like a rat in a cage hitting the lever for cheese. It's not about cruelty, it's about conditioning. So the next time she pulls away, and your instinct is to fix it, do nothing. Hold. Don't reach out. Don't panic. Don't chase. Give her silence back. Not as a game, but as a reset. You're not punishing her. You're breaking the cycle. Now, she'll notice, and she'll test you again. Maybe with a snide remark. Maybe with exaggerated indifference. Maybe with, "I just feel like you've changed." That's the trap. She wants you to prove her wrong, to snap back into the version of you that danced for her approval. Don't. Instead, respond with grounded calm. I'm not interested in playing games. If you want something, communicate it. Otherwise, I'm not chasing shadows. That's strength. That's emotional leadership. That's the energy of a man who isn't afraid of being alone because he refuses to abandon himself. You see, when a woman feels that you are terrified of losing her, you become predictable. And what is predictable eventually becomes unattractive. Not because you're boring, but because you've made her feel too important in your psychological hierarchy. You've placed her validation above your self-respect. And subconsciously, that tells her you don't have boundaries, and no one desires what they do not respect. Let that sink in. Because the moment she senses that your emotional well-being depends on her mood, she no longer needs to communicate clearly. She can control without words. And that, right there, is where most men lose themselves, not from cruelty, but from giving too much of themselves in hopes of keeping her close. So, here's the recalibration. Love her, yes. Be present, yes. But hold your line, speak your truth, protect your peace. If she disappears emotionally, don't chase, observe. If she punishes you with silence, don't fill it with anxious noise, match it with presence. If she withdraws, let her. You are not afraid. You are not needy. You are not a man who begs to be understood. You are a man who demands emotional honesty or walks away from confusion. And the man who masters this energy, he doesn't just attract women. He commands respect, not by force, but by holding his power, even when every fear inside him screamed to give it away. There's a subtle but dangerous transformation that happens when a man starts giving away his emotional power. It doesn't begin with a dramatic argument or a grand betrayal. It starts with tiny compromises, skipping the gym because she seemed upset, not speaking your mind to avoid an uncomfortable silence, laughing at a joke that belittled you just to keep the peace. One by one, these micro-abandonments seem harmless, but they become the architecture of a cage you build with your own hand. What most men don't realize is that emotional dependency isn't about how often you text or how close you are. It's about your need to be received in a certain way, just to feel okay. It's the desperation behind the smile, the hidden question behind every gesture. Do I still matter to you? And when you start living in that place, you're no longer relating from strength, you're performing for survival. This is where she senses it most. She doesn't have to consciously plan it. It's instinctual. A woman can feel the shift when your confidence collapses into craving, when your presence stops being an offering and starts being a negotiation, when your energy stops saying, "I'm here because I choose to be," and starts whispering, "Please don't leave." And here's what happens next. She stops showing up with the same softness. She tests more. She withholds more. Not out of cruelty, but curiosity. She wants to know what kind of man you really are. Will you collapse under pressure? Will you betray yourself just to win her approval? Will you sell your dignity for a little bit of affection? And when you do, when you trade your masculine core for comfort, something dies in her. The polarity disappears. She may stay with you physically, but emotionally, she starts drifting. And you'll feel it. You'll feel it in the way her eyes don't light up anymore, in the way her texts grow colder, in the way intimacy feels like obligation, not desire. And instead of confronting this, most men double down on the performance. More gifts, more apology, more effort, and still, she pulls away. Let's go deeper. This isn't just about your relationship with her. This is about your relationship with yourself. Because when you let fear govern your emotional decisions, you betray the part of you that was built to lead, not dominate, but lead with integrity. And here's the truth. No one tells you. Women don't lose respect when you make mistakes. They lose respect when you hide who you are to avoid consequences. There's a reason she doesn't tell you what she feels, but expects you to just know. It's not because she's trying to be mysterious. It's because she's watching whether you can read the emotional map without begging for instructions. She wants to see if you're emotionally fluent, or if you panic in silence. And when you crumble under that pressure, she stops seeing you as someone who can carry her world. This is how emotional manipulation gains its roots. Not through abuse, but through your absence, through your refusal to say, "I see you're upset, but I won't chase your approval. I will stand in who I am." That doesn't mean you become cold or uncaring. It means you stop being emotionally kidnapped by every shift in her mood. Let's talk about practical strength. Next time she withdraws affection, instead of immediately reacting, pause. Take inventory. Ask yourself, is this behavior consistent with how I deserve to be treated? Or am I about to overextend myself because I'm scared of losing access to her? That pause is everything. It interrupts the old loop. It returns your focus inward. And when you stop reacting and start reflecting, you shift the energy. You stop being the puppet. You become the observer. You say more in your silence than most men say with 1,000 words. You can be warm and still have boundary. You can be loving and still have limits. The idea that emotional availability means full emotional surrender is a myth that keeps men in chains. You don't need to suppress your feelings, but you must stop outsourcing your sense of self to someone else's behavior. Remember the story of the lion tamer and the chair? A lion tamer walks into the ring with a whip, a stool, and no cage. You'd think the whip was the main tool, but it's the chair, specifically the 4 legs pointed at the lion's face, that disorients him. He can't focus. He doesn't attack. He becomes passive. That's what happens to you when you allow too many emotional signals from her to enter your mind at once. Her mood, her silence, her criticism, her warmth, her coldness, all pointed at you. And instead of acting from clarity, you freeze. Now imagine instead being the lion that recognizes the game. You see the chair, you see the distraction, but you don't flinch. You focus. That focus is your power. It's the ability to respond, not react, to discern without needing approval, to love without begging to be loved back. This is the kind of man who doesn't panic when she tests him. He remains composed when she's irrational. He doesn't reward cold behavior. He doesn't beg for closeness. He stands in the storm, rooted, clear, present. And ironically, it is this very stillness that pulls her back, not your chase. So what's the shift? Stop asking, "How do I make her happy?" And start asking, "What kind of man am I becoming in her presence?" Because the truth is, she will never respect a man who needs her to feel secure. She will test, not because she's cruel, but because she wants to feel the masculine anchor beneath the wave. If every emotional wave can knock you over, you're not an anchor, you're driftwood. And the moment you become driftwood, she no longer feels safe. Because a woman may crave connection, but she respects stability. Not the kind that avoids conflict, but the kind that remains honest and grounded inside it. This isn't about playing games, it's about reclaiming emotional clarity. You're not here to decode every sigh. You're here to walk in your truth so powerfully that she either aligns with it or walks away. And either outcome is okay, because your peace is not for sale. The most dangerous illusion a man can fall into is thinking that emotional silence equals emotional safety. But silence, in this case, is not peace. It's tension, unspoken. And if you're not careful, that silence will become your prison. You'll stop expressing yourself not because there's nothing to say, but because every time you spoke in the past, it seemed to make things worse. You'll start believing that staying quiet is a strategy, when in reality, it's submission. And submission is not love. It's slow erosion. That's when she starts leading the emotional dance, and you're just following. Not because she wants to dominate, but because she feels you're absent. And no woman stays emotionally loyal to a man who has emotionally disappeared. She may still text you, she may still kiss you, but inside, her compass starts drifting towards something else, something that feels alive, unpredictable, and emotionally real, even if it's unstable. Especially if it's unstable. Why? Because emotional presence is the currency of masculine power. Not aggression, not control. Presence. Presence means you are there without disappearing into her moods. It means when she tests you with silence, you don't panic. When she criticizes you, you don't collapse. You hear her fully, but you don't lose yourself in the process. Most men don't realize this is the exact point where the power dynamic shifts, and it usually starts with something small. A minor disagreement, a missed call, a passive-aggressive comment. You feel a drop in her tone, and suddenly, you're doing everything in your power to fix something that may not even be broken. This is the silent manipulation few men know how to handle, because it doesn't look like manipulation. It looks like subtle disapproval, like withdrawal of affection, like "I'm fine" when she clearly isn't. And your instinct is to appease, to explain, to ask, "What did I do wrong?" But every time you do that, you reinforce a message. You have the power to define how I feel about myself. That's when you lose, because now you've handed her the emotional steering wheel, and she didn't ask for it. And that's where the resentment grows. She might not even be fully aware of it, but part of her starts to despise how easily you fold, how quickly you trade your center for her temporary approval. And over time, she'll lose respect, even if she still says she loves you. Now think about this through the lens of leadership. A king does not ask his kingdom how to rule. He listens, he learns, but he does not abandon the throne every time someone screams. A man grounded in himself doesn't tremble at emotional weather. He recognizes that storms are part of the emotional terrain. And when she lashes out, or pulls back, or tests him, it's not always war. Sometimes it's her searching for evidence that he's still there, still strong, still himself. Let's look at a real-life example. Imagine a man named Alex. Every time his girlfriend Jenna gets upset, he panics. He over-explains, sends long texts, buys gifts, tries to cheer her up. And at first, she appreciates it. But soon, she begins to test him more, picks more fights, gets colder. Why? Because deep down, she's wondering, why is he so eager to please? What's he hiding? Now imagine another man, Marcus. Jenna tests him too, withdraws affection, goes silent. But instead of chasing, Marcus holds his ground. He doesn't match her coldness, but he doesn't beg for warmth either. He simply says, "I feel something has shifted between us. I won't force you to talk, but I'm here. Just don't mistake my stillness for indifference." In that moment, Jenna feels something she didn't expect: safety. Not because Marcus caved, but because he didn't. Because he stayed true to his tone without losing her in it. And that's when the game changes. Not through tactic, but through truth. It's not about becoming emotionally unavailable. It's about becoming emotionally sovereign. That means you recognize her feelings without adopting them. You acknowledge her storms without building your home in the rain. You remain fully present, but you are never hostage to her validation. Let's go deeper. Most men were never taught emotional discipline. You were probably told to be sensitive, but never shown how to be strong while sensitive. So you learned to either shut down or overshare. Neither creates attraction. What creates attraction is restraint with awareness, knowing when to speak, knowing when to be silent, not out of fear, but out of clarity. A man who can do that commands attention without demanding it, and women feel it instantly. There's a strange paradox in relationships. The more you try to prove your worth, the less worthy you seem, because proof screams insecurity. But when you embody worth through your tone, your pace, your boundaries, you don't need to prove anything. And this is where emotional manipulation dies, not through confrontation, but through your refusal to play the invisible game. One of the strongest things you can say to a woman during conflict is this: I care deeply, but I won't compromise my self-respect to avoid discomfort. That one sentence destroys the pattern of emotional blackmail, not because it makes her submit, but because it makes her feel something rare, a man who is clear. And clarity, to a woman who lives in emotional complexity, is magnetic. Let's bring it home with one more example. You've had a long day. You come home. She's cold, passive-aggressive. Something's clearly wrong, but she says it's nothing. The old you would probe, apologize, dance around her moods, but the new you walk over, you sit down, you look her in the eyes and say, I sense you're carrying, and I'm open to talk when you're ready, but I won't beg to be let in. My door is open. I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to meet you. That energy, that's untouchable. That's the kind of presence that makes her stop using silence as a weapon. Because weapons don't work on men who are already whole, but the greatest mistake a man can make in this dynamic is thinking that more effort equals more clarity. That if he just tries harder, texts more often, asks more questions, makes more plans, she will eventually open up and tell him what he's been dying to understand. But it doesn't work that way. In fact, the opposite happens. The more desperate you appear for emotional clarity, the less respect you command. And once respect begins to erode, connection becomes a performance, not a desire. She may still smile, she may still respond, but underneath, something is changing. Because women don't just crave love, they crave certainty in your emotional power. They test your center, not because they want to break you, but because they want to feel anchored to someone unshakable. When you chase her mood, her silence, her passive disappointment with frantic attempts to fix the atmosphere, you unknowingly show her that you're not in control of yourself. And nothing kills attraction like a man who loses his structure under pressure. This is where the real game begins, not in fixing the emotional dissonance, but in refusing to be enslaved by it. Emotional sovereignty is your greatest shield, and it's built not by closing yourself off, but by refusing to interpret every silence as a personal failure. Sometimes she doesn't want you to solve her. She wants to see if you can stand still while she storms, not retreat, not beg, not lecture, just hold frame. That silent strength, that unspoken confidence, it communicates everything she needs to feel safe, without a single word being said. Most men misunderstand this balance. They either lean too far into neediness, constantly seeking approval and emotional validation, or swing to the other extreme, becoming cold, withdrawn, indifferent. Neither approach works. The first destroys respect. The second kills intimacy. What works is mystery with warmth, leadership with empathy, presence without desperation. You show her that you're paying attention, but that her emotional climate doesn't define your emotional state. And this is where you regain power, not over her, but over yourself. Because once you stop trying to decode every gesture and every sigh, you begin to see patterns instead of chaos. You recognize that not all silence is rejection, not all distance is punishment. You begin to respond with maturity instead of panic. And that's where everything changes. Because while she may never tell you exactly what she feels, she always responds to how you make her feel. And when you master that, when your presence becomes more grounding than your words, you no longer chase connection, you embody it. And in the end, that's what she's truly looking for. Not a man who understands every mood, but one who doesn't collapse under them. Not someone who always gets it right, but someone who remains calm when things go wrong. Because the emotional game isn't about perfection, it's about endurance. And the men who endure are the ones who are never afraid to walk away from a game they no longer need to win. Let me know when you're ready for the next theme.